This is a very special day for us. It's a time when we take the opportunity to reflect on what's taken place, reflect on how things started here in Orlando. In 1956, as you heard earlier, this site, Lake Underhill Road, as well as Sand Lake Road, were really trees and swamps, a few farms and citrus groves during that time. It's kind of hard to believe it when you look at it today and you look at the number of employees and the awesome things that we do. So you kind of have to imagine the thoughts of those young men at the time who were told what this was going to be here. And our speaker did share a photo of a group of those, all of who had their chests poked out as they were anticipating, I think, a real new era here in the Orlando area. Well, we've got someone today who was a part of that and who can share in how that took place, as well as some of the things that even today we look back on and have to credit that effort for the businesses that we're in. Our speaker is Ed Sauceman. He's one of 15 Glen L. Martin Company employees who were part of that startup. He moved to Florida 50 years ago. He helped build a company that today Orlando is proud to call Lockheed Martin. As a result, families continue to move to Orlando to join this team. And we're proud to have not only Ed here today, but second generation of Saucemans. Ed Jr. works for us. I hadn't met Ed Sr. when I came to town, but saw something in Ed Jr. here and quickly got him to take a leadership role on our team. So Ed, would you stand? I don't know if there are any other generations of Saucemans in the room, but also with us today are several employees who've seen Orlando become a tourist destination and seen the Lockheed Martin company become the largest in the world. And we'd like to take a time to recognize those people. They are long service employees who, frankly, we're just happy they could make it with us today. And as I call their name, I'll ask them to come up here in front for just a second so that the cameras can pick them up and we might even get a photo op. Peggy Rose, 48 years of service. William Morwood, 40 years of service. Bill Perkins, 40 years of service. William Walker, 40 years of service. Jim Wasden, 40 years of service. And I think Mr. Charles Hatfield couldn't make it, I don't believe, today. Are you here? Okay, Charles, are you here? 41 years of service. Let him get here and let's give them one more resounding applause here. Can we do it? Danny? Thank you. You noticed you had to have 40 years to get in the club here, so thank you very much. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So Lockheed Martin is certainly proud to call our guest speaker one of our own. He began working for the Martin Company in 1939 as an assemblyman's helper. So he hadn't always been a bigwig. As the director of planning for Glen L. Martin Company, he was a member of the startup team that opened the New Orlando facility. His career spanned 36 years with the Glen L. Martin Company, and he retired from Martin Marietta as the director of master planning and management systems in 1975. Today, he's a lay minister at his church in what he calls the shortest retirement on record. His job description went from the top secret to top sacred. Ed's motto is, "Too blessed to be stressed." And he truly lives this on a daily basis. Shortly after I had hired young Sauceman here, I qualified to be on Ed's mailing list and have enjoyed his bits of wisdom and certainly his Christian orientation and support during that time. He was also one of the first people to show up at the hospital when I went through my little unplanned vacation a few months back. So he is a people person. Each year he gives away hundreds of $2 bills with the inscription Fast Eddie and John 3:16. Most of you will be familiar with that. We're pleased to have Ed here today, not only for the history that he's had with Lockheed Martin, but for the individual and the role model he's been for a number in this community and continues to do that. And judging from the speaking engagements he's had recently, there's no intent on slowing down. Join me in welcoming Ed Sauceman.
Thank you, Joe, for a wonderful introduction. I believe every speaker, including me, the very first thing in your note is, "It's indeed a real honor and a privilege to be here." Now, whether they mean it or not, it sounds good, but really, you don't know how great a privilege and honor this is to be here, be introduced by Joe, and having Dale over here listen the second time. He's going to be my critique. And then to have my son. And then to have Bill Morwood's son here being honored for 40 years because his dad and I worked together 60-some years ago in Baltimore. You know, it's been said, a Chinese proverb or something, that when the son exceeds the father is the victor. You never know how you're going to be introduced. Some people read what you gave them, some talk about you from the heart, but you never know. But I want to straighten out some things before we get too far. Number one, my dialect is not Florida cracker. I was born and raised in Balmer. That's B-A-L-M-O. It's near Washington, D.C. The Balmer Orioles, you heard of Balmer. Well, that's where I was born. I got my education there. As a matter of fact, I earned my Ph.D. in Balmer. That's plain high school diploma. And I started at the Martin Company, as Joe said, as a helper's helper help. Now, there's nothing lower than a helper's helper. That meant you picked up bolts and nuts off the floor and cleaned his tools. But that was my life. Before I came down, my pastor yesterday said, you know, I'm 87 years old. My pastor said, Ed, you're at the age you ought to be thinking more and more about the hereafter. I said, I do that every day. I go in the kitchen, I say, no, what am I here after? I go in the bathroom, I say, no, what am I here after? I'm very optimistic. I'm a planner. I'm already working on the 100th anniversary, so be around. I just bought 48 rolls of toilet paper. What was on sale, you know. Well, you never know. But I just want to tell you that some years ago in Birmingham, Alabama, at an Air Force base, the commanding officer got up to introduce me to give a presentation. And he went on and on and on, Martin's in my blood. I've been there 20-some years. I now rose to a rank of a senior, and that's my life. I live Martin, that's my life. And he went on and on about what Martin went in my life. Then he said, Ed doesn't have any leisure hobbies. He doesn't play golf. He doesn't fish. He doesn't chase women. What he does is church work. He's very active in his local church. He's active on the Florida level and is on several commissions on the National Lutheran Church in America. And he went on about me being a born-again Lutheran. And then he finally got around to it. He said, I take great pleasure in introducing today to Martin Luther, King of Florida. Birmingham, Alabama, 1965. Being a born-again pack rat, and I got files at home, in my car, in the office, I'm also blessed with a very good memory. Now that's a combination. Don't ever get into a discussion with a guy's got a tremendous memory and a pack rat, because he'll always pull a picture out of a file. But I'd be here for over 3 hours to tell you what happened 50 years ago. Because what happened here 50 years ago with the Martin Company changed this town. Dramatically changed this town. As Joe and I was talking earlier, it's very few people that know it. They know Disney, but we were the ones that changed this town. So I'm not going to stand here and talk on and on and on about this, but I don't wear a watch. I stopped wearing a watch a long time ago, so I want to make sure now, some of you on lunch, I don't want to overtime, so I'm going to put this right here, and somebody might want to keep an eye on it for me. But let me share a story, and then we'll have a deal, okay? This story is about an old farmer out west that needed a new horse for his wagon. So he went down and rode a piece to his buddy's farm, and they began to negotiate for a new horse. And they got to the point where we were about to close the deal and change money, and his buddy said, Joe, I better tell you about this horse before you buy him, because it's unusual. When you want this horse to go, you don't say, giddy up, let's go. He won't move an inch. But when you yell, holy mackerel, man, he takes off 50 miles an hour. He said, well, that's unusual, but I'll take him. He said something else. When you want this horse to stop, you don't say, whoa, slow down, stop. He'll keep on going 50 miles an hour. He said, the only way this horse stops is when you yell amen. And when you yell amen, man, he stops right on the dot. Well, he said, that's unusual, but I'll take him. So he paid him off, hitched the horse up, and he got up in that way. Holy mackerel, holy, man, they're going down and around, up and down the hills in the valley. Holy mackerel, man, they're going like crazy. And up ahead, he knew it was a drop. It was a cliff up ahead, and they're going right for that cliff, 50 miles an hour. Oh, stop, whoa, and the horse kept on going. And he remembered what his friend said, and he yelled, amen. And when he did, that horse and wagon was right on the end of that cliff. And he looked down there 2,000 feet. He said, holy mackerel. Now, if I hear somebody saying holy mackerel, I'm going to keep on preaching. And if somebody says amen, I'll stop. In the beginning, half a century ago, 210, whatever way you want to put it, 1956. Orlando was a kind of a sleepy little town. A bunch of snowbirds laying around downtown in the park. Citrus was big. Not much going on at all. Afternoon naps and so forth. There were only about 60,000 people in all of Orlando and 220,000 in the whole county. The city's power structure and the movers and shakers was few, very tight-knit group, but it included the mayor, Rolf Davis, the elect mayor, Bob Carr, the CEO of the Sun Trust now, which First National, that's Linton Allen, the state road board member, Billy Dahl, the newspaper publisher, Martin Anderson, and the president of Citizen National Bank, Clarence Gay. That was Orlando 50 years ago. 50 years ago in Middle River, we had a new CEO, a live wire named George Bunker, who now was coming in to let Martin grow. And he was looking for another plant because we had already had a plant in Denver to build the Titans. We had a lot of activity at the Cape, more than any other defense contractor. And in Baltimore, then we wanted another plant to build electronics, communications, lasers, things like that. The main topic around Baltimore at that time was Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts. So on a hot summer day, Bunker and Ed Ewell, who was going to be the general manager here, came down, landed at Showalter, which is the executive airport. They thought that would last forever. They were in tourist clothes, walked down to Orange Avenue, went north on Orange Avenue a couple blocks to the Citizen National Bank, and they asked to see Clarence Gay, the president. So they went in, and he was gracious, you know, and they said, well, we're here to look for a couple hundred acres to build a little missile plant, and he was polite, but he wasn't very encouraging. Well, Orlando, you know, we don't want to change a lot, and people are quiet and everything. And that was about it. So they walked out and they looked at each other and they said, well, maybe we ought to get on a plane and go up to Tennessee and Georgia, because we were going to look at sites there also. And then Ed Ewell said, well, what about that reference from Wall Street Journal? Don't leave town without seeing Linton Allen. Linton Allen was the CEO president of the First National Bank. So they went down South Orange Avenue, went in the bank, and no offices. Here the president of the bank is right out in the middle of the tellers. And he greeted them warmly because his philosophy, his credo was to build your bank, you build your community. So he welcomed us with arms of help to build this community. And they shared what was going on. Within 10 minutes, he had the mayor, he had the president of the development board, he had the road commission member, and they were all in the old San Juan Hotel having lunch. Very warm reception. Before they left town, they said, well, we won't have any trouble looking up some parcels. We know what you want now. You just give us a couple of weeks and we'll come visit you and tell you what is available. So then the first thing that happened was Mr. Allen turned to Bunker. He said, George, can you give me your business card? George said, I don't have a business card. He said, well, here. So he gave him a 3x5 card. He said, put your name and company on here. So he put George Bunker, Glen L. Martin, Middle River, Maryland. Mr. Allen went back to his bank, called his friend on Wall Street. He said, hey, who is this company, Glen L. Martin Bunker? He said, my God, that's one of the largest defense plans in the country. That's how it started. So anyway, within a couple weeks, about 8 people from Orlando, the mayor, and developing people all came to Maryland and said, we have 9 parcels of various sizes, but the one we would highly recommend is an estate from a Ziegler foundation. The family had a death and the relatives wanted the money fast. So they were willing to sell us 6,400 acres for $1.3 million. It comes out about $200 an acre. Of course, it was way out of town. But they urged us to buy that, and Mr. Linton Allen really said, why don't you consider it? Meanwhile, I'll put up $2,500 to keep it held. They talked. Martin quickly said, well, now look, we're going to need high power voltage, we're going to need sewage, we're going to need water, we're going to need roads, we're going to have this. And they promised on the spot that the governor for the state, the local county, the city would cooperate in all those as we needed. They shook hands and agreed that the 6,400 acre would be the spot. 22 days. The whole deal was closed from the day they came down to look around. I guess today something like that would take at least a year. Okay, I call this part wasteland to missile factory. After the deal was made and everybody shook hands, we purchased the land on September the 15th, 1956. And immediately, the old-timers, and by the way, I told Joe, the other day I spoke at the University Club downtown. Now, that's the big shots, you know. And a lot of them were second generation of the mayor and the bankers and all those people. And they remembered this, but the old-timers were laughing up their sleeve. These young guys, we averaged 39 years old, our team. These young guys come down and they got 6,400 snakes, rattlesnakes, turkeys, bear. They had all kind of stuff, and it's way out of town. Way down. It's near Gatorland. By the way, you know it's going to be rebuilt. It's way down there. And they were laughing, you know, man. It's muck, all kind of muck down. And then that's what's going on there. They were really laughing up their sleeve at us because it was way out of town, and what were they going to do with it? Meanwhile, in Maryland, now these are young guys with vision, with dreams. We weren't sitting still. Ed Ewell, I got to tell him, he was brilliant. He was the co-inventor of the bazooka in World War II. Now, when you see TV of Iraq with those guys with the tubes on their shoulder, that's just an advanced copy of the bazooka. So Ed Ewell was quickly made the general manager to be here, and he picked his 14 directors, of which I was fortunate to be one. And here's what he did. He rounded up the 300 employees that was working on the bullpup, the lacrosse, and the missile master, which was the intercontinental detection system. The 300 employees in Middle River, he moved that whole group up into the other side of Baltimore, 30 miles away, rented a great big building, and the 300 of us worked in that building as though we were already in Orlando. You can't believe we had Orlando letters. We were already in Orlando, starting in Baltimore. We had two 404 airplanes, 40 passenger, we had built for Eastern Airline, and we took them as company planes. We were shuttling them immediately, twice a week, back and forward. We didn't bring down the employee that's going to be transferred. We brought his family, the wife and the kids on the airplane. Come down here, and within 3-4 days, they got around. Most of them bought a house on the spot or made a deal on a house. They lined up their school, they lined up their church, they lined up PTAs and little leagues in a couple days. And we were shuttling them back as fast as we get the airplanes overhauled. Now here's some facts and figures I throw out, but it was amazing. And it took the local people 2 years to realize how big we were. They thought we were going to build a couple Quonset huts, bring some people down. Well, the plant construction started on April 1st after we cleaned land. And we made it so that the Bay Area and the first floor allowed cement trucks to drive right in. So we just took trucks right in and laid the concrete right out of the truck in the building. That kind of amazed them when they found it out. We started putting in equipment and desks and furniture and everything, shooting for the first of 1958 for opening. In December of 1957, Orlando had a freeze. It got down to 40 maybe. But we call that a freeze. No electronic stuff now, no computers. But the girls were on electronic typewriters wearing gloves. They were cold. The guys working on missiles had gloves. And the director of the bullpup said, "We can't go on this way." It was about the middle of December. He said, "We can't wait for the plant to finish. They're only laying tile and that stuff." Everybody was told, come and take whatever you can put in your private car, your typewriter, your files, whatever you got, trucks, vans, whatever. They moved in the plant. They're still laying tile, but they moved in the plant. So I can go on and on and on, and outside was this golf ball and a tee, a $500,000 water tower. That was the landmark of the building. So I could go on in those details and everything, but the plant was finished in about 9 months. As Dale said, it was the largest building in Florida. The actual figure was 626,000 square feet. It was voted one of the top 10 new plants in the whole nation that year. And the people here were still going around, these young guys, They didn't know what was going on, just 20 miles down from the city. From fall 1956 through December 58, we transferred 1,100 employees and their families. It equated, close to 4,000 when you consider the kids. That's how many we transferred. Well, being director of planning, I knew who was coming. I knew who was on the airplanes, and being transferred down. So I got all of them, and I said, look, when you get to Orlando, there's only one church. Only one church in the whole Central Florida. That's St. John Lutheran Church. I said, you come down there and join that, you'll be a charter member of the Martin Luther Sunday School class. Well, that's a little ecumenical joke, but 5 of our 15 top staff were members of our church and 100 employees. So I guess you call that a little evangelism, Joe, but it was smooth on our end. It was great, and it was wonderful. By May 57, what's that, 8 months, we'd already had 1,000 employees. By October 58, we had 5,000. And in November 62, we hit our peak in Orlando, and even to today, 10,800 people. Both Mayor Crotty of Orange County and his dad worked at Martin. That's quite a milestone, and they brag about it. They got plaques on our desks and everything. The first lacrosse missile, which was a surface-to-surface missile tested out in White Sands, we delivered the first one out of a hangar at Showalter in 6 months, just bringing bits and pieces down from Baltimore. And a couple months later, we delivered the first bullpup to the Navy. Now I want to wind up with some stories. You might find these interesting. And it was more interesting those days. So we closed the deal September the 26th or so. And on October the 26th, here comes two guys into Showalter Field about 3 o'clock in the morning, checked into Cherry Plaza, which is called Lake Eola now. One of them was Charlie Andersax. He's now 88. He's still in town. He's, like me, he's about 5'5", about 120 pounds. The very next morning, he goes downtown, and George Stewart. Now, there's four Stewart brothers. Jacob was in charge of the Chamber of Commerce. Robert was just elected to the City Council of Orlando. Charlie was just in an election campaign, and George was a state senator and now a lawyer. So the four Stewart brothers are very, very good friends of mine, but their dad owned the only stationery store in town. So little Charlie went in, and Mr. Stewart was such a friendly guy. "Can I help you, sir?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I want to talk about some office furniture." "Oh, yeah, well, you come over here." Charlie said, "Well, I'm thinking about 350 desks and chairs, 95 file cabinets, 25 copy machines, and a ton of paper." He said, "Well, you better sit down." He left him. He walked down Showalter. He said, we need some space to build some lacrosse missiles and bullpups." "Oh, yeah, we got some space here." He said, "I'm talking about 3 of your hangars." And they only had 4. So you see how we got started. We talked big, and here they were still in the Middle Ages. The second story is the water tower. Now, Charlie Blaney's no longer with us. Great big guy. This was a man's man. Charlie could get anything done, anywhere. And the credit goes to Charlie on our plant. Getting it done proper, within cost, that was his project. And he just had the personality and the drive to work with the city people and everyone else to get it done. And his pride and joy was that water tower. So early after the plant was done and we were getting one of the best plants in the nation, George Bunker brought 18 board of directors down. Now, you know what board of directors are in a big corporation. They're presidents of universities and banks and president of companies and all, big millionaires. He brought them down to see this plant. So some of us took them on a tour of the engineering and Checkerboard Square, which was our executive area and the factory, and it was spotless. And they just improved and loved everything. So Blaney took them around this water tower. And he was so proud. And they're circling the water tower. He said, "Now, gentlemen, I got to tell you about this. We knew we needed 500,000 gallons of water a day. So we figured we'd have a day supply in this water tower. It's 149 and 6 inches high, because if it was 150, we need all kind of lights because of aircraft." And he said it's about 150 feet from the lobby. He said there's 30 pilings, goes down 90 feet for foundation for this thing, because it's got 700 tons of steel in there. It's got 85 miles of welding rod and 742 gallons of paint. And he went on statistic after statistic, so proud. And when he got done, this is all in a joking way, Bunker looked at the top to the bottom. He said, "Charlie, that's the most useless set of statistics I've ever heard in my life." He said, it's beyond the building. He said, "But if we ever have a hurricane and that blows over, here we're going to have one hell of a lot of water in the lobby." He said, "There's only 2 other places I'd like to see that water tower instead of the plant. And that's about 2 miles down the road near the airport, or that far up your..." Story number 3. In December 57, the plant opened, the governor was here, cut the tapes and everything, and it was open house. People were just amazed. The Orlando people, the biggest place they'd been in is Penny's store up on Orange Avenue. They come down and saw this, all the factory, spick and span. They were absolutely amazed. They were amazed to see all this space. We'd already had 2,500 employees working, and they were just amazed by everything about it. They then realized, now remember, we were average age 39, and the leaders in Orlando were about 55, so it was almost a generation between they and us, and we were thinking that way. They finally were embarrassed that they hadn't cooperated more than they had in recognizing this. We'd hired some of their people and paid them more money with benefits. So they finally realized we ought to have a formal welcome. So all the big shots in town, 25, 30 of them, the who's who, if you will, they had a big banquet downtown at the Angel Hotel. That was the place. Had a ballroom upstairs, and they had this big banquet. And they had everything you could eat and drink, and they were going to welcome us, but they're going to feed us first. Well, they want to, make us feel good, so they had some terrapin soup. You ever hear of terrapin soup? Turtle soup or something. Well, anyway, they had some of that. And they had raw oysters. Now, I don't know how many people knows about raw oysters. If you're from Maryland or Virginia, you know what raw oyster. You don't eat it with a fork and knife. And you don't put horseradish and ketchup and lemon on there. You just take a raw oyster on a shell and you slurp it up. That's raw oysters. So they had trays like this. And the waiter would come out with this tray, and he sat it down, and Charlie Blaney and I is over in the corner somewhere having a beer. And the guys swarmed around there for a moment. Man, and we run over, and they're all gone except the half shells are back on the tray. So we went back, we'll get the next one. Here comes the guy again. Well, by the time we got there, there's nothing on the tray but empty shells again. He said, we're going to follow that guy. We're going to follow him in the kitchen, and we're going to follow him out. Well, we followed him, but he didn't go in the kitchen. At the end of the hall was a stage like this where they had a little band, and they had a curtain around there. So this guy went up with the tray, and he went aside, he went in there. You'll like it. He had a half a dozen gallons of raw oysters. And he took a fork, and he put one on each one of those shells for about the third or fourth time. Blaney and I said, don't tell anybody. Monday morning, that was the first thing on the staff report. How'd you like those? Oh, I had 3 dozen. I had 2 dozen. And they're bragging. They were pretty good, weren't they? They weren't Maryland oysters. They were from Appalachia up here in Panhandle. But they were tasty, salty, good. Oh, they were very good. And then Blaney dropped the news. Nobody went to lunch that day. So anyway, they got up one by one, the mayor and all of it, and they said, welcome to our town, you're our neighbors. We appreciate you. We'll keep cooperating with you and all that sort of thing, even a little bit of apology, one by one by one. And then the last one to get up was Dave Starr. Anybody remember Dave Starr? Dave Starr was our sheriff. Dave Starr parked his white horse out on Orange Avenue. He did it all the time. White hat, pearl handled pistol. He got up. He said, now, things are going to change. He said, Orlando's a sleepy little town. Go downtown shopping. Don't have to lock the car. Let your camera and purse on the front seat. Nobody's going to touch it. At home, you never lock your door at home. Your neighbor may want to come in and get a couple eggs or some sugar. Kids leave their toys out. Nobody's going to touch it. That's the way we live. We're quiet. Everybody knows everybody. But things are going to change. Now, what we're hearing, things are going to change. Well, some of the people already were embarrassed that we're going to come to town and rob their cameras. So he was the last speaker. So then they turned and they said, Mr. Yule, do you gentlemen have anything to respond? Well, this was our home. So we did think about what we'd like to see in our new community and home. He said, yes, we've had some thoughts about it. He said, but first I'd like to say, Sheriff, that the 1,100 people we're sending down, they're not going to be the ones breaking in your house and stealing your cameras. And they were embarrassed. We got letters for weeks afterwards apologizing to what Dave Starr had said. Before going on, let me tell you about Dave Starr. 6 months later, he called Ed Yule one night. He said, Mr. Yule, he said, I got to tell you something. He said, down on Orange Avenue across from the Sentinel, a couple guys are renting a storefront. And my deputy went in, what you guys going to do? Well, they're from the West Coast, California, and they were in Orlando to interview engineers to go back to California. They were recruiting young engineers that we either brought in or hired here. He said, what should I do, Mr. Yule? Well, Ed said, well, I can't do anything but them. He said, but they shouldn't be here recruiting our engineers. He said, well, I can take care of it if you want, Mr. Yule. Ed said, well, I'll appreciate anything you can do, Sheriff. He ran them out of town. They paid a month's rent and never used the building. He ushered them down to the airport and said, you men aren't welcome here. That's the way Orlando was, 50 years ago. So Ed Yule said, no, this is our home. He said, we sold our houses in Maryland, bought new houses here. We go to your churches, your school. We're already running little leagues and everything else. And we're involved. We're in your communication because Mr. Bunker did something very, very wonderful in the beginning. We had a map tack and personnel of Orange County. And every employee that was transferred and bought a house, or every new employee, we put a map tag. Bunker did not want a little, as we call Bunker Hill. He didn't want all of Martin in a community. He wanted us to be integrated in the whole community. And we did a marvelous job, because if you looked at that map, they were all over Central Florida. I mean, not just Maitland or Pine Hills or somewhere like that. They were all over. And that we did on purpose. So he went on, he said, we talked to staff, and we're recommending 5 programs that you ought to seriously consider right away. Number 1, we suggest that you close Orange Avenue at Colonial all the way down to south, because all the stores were down there. If you want to dress, you went down there. You want a pair of shoes, you go down there. Close it, cover it over, and make it a downtown mall. They didn't know what a mall was. And some of them, did you hear that? Number 2, he said immediately you ought to have a beltway around the town. Still on? I'm sorry. A beltway, like you got up in Maryland and Washington. Not a 436 red light, but a beltway around the town to feed all the outer skirts into town. Number 3, he said it's not that much activity to Cape Martin's 75% of it right now, but we foresee Cape Canaveral becoming the space capital of the world. 1957. And we recommend that you ought to seriously consider a monorail from Orlando to the Cape. Somebody could get over there in 30 minutes, do business, out. That's long before Disney. They laughed at us. He said, now I know Miami and Atlanta are kind of international hubs, but really, Orlando could be one of the largest, one of the best international airports in the nation. They were saying, Showalter, those little private, they'll be here forever. McCoy, of course, that was a SAC base. The last item he said was, we believe you ought to have a cross-state freeway from the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. And that freeway ought to go right on over, non-stop like the Autobahns in Germany. But we're saying down the middle of that freeway ought to be a high-speed train system. You could go from Atlantic Ocean to Tampa in 35 minutes. They laughed. Some were heard to say, you talk about Buck Rogers. These young guys, where are they going to take us? That's the kind of response we got. And we got many, many letters of apology and forgiveness for what they had done. My 4th story gets a little emotional for me because I was involved quite heavily. But we had 9,000 employees or so in the 60s. And we began to realize we had all these young engineers, some we brought down and some we hired. And they were anxious about continuing their education, keeping up with the state of the art and the changes, technological. So Martin was a forerunner. Somebody will record these kind of things. Martin was a forerunner, went to the county, who's now cooperating with us. They said, look, we need a university in this area. Elsewise, we're going to lose engineers to California and other places. And we're going to put up this amount of money. Martin put up a big bundle of money to buy land for a university. Immediately, with our push and now our influence and effect on the economy, other leaders come in, personal gifts, company gifts, and they had enough money to go out and buy a big parcel of land for a future university. And you know what the university name is going to be? Florida Technological University. You ever hear of MIT? This was going to be the MIT of the South. Florida Technological University. Within a couple of years, we had the land, and they picked Charles Millikan. Charlie Millikan is quite ill, and I'm going to give him a private speech. You may want to go with me there, Dan. And he's sickly, he's 91, got pneumonia, but his heart is here, and with Martin. He brought 18 of his top people. Half were about deans of different schools, the other were operation directors. He brought them to the plant for an all-day planning session to share with his people how we did business with the Pentagon. You know, on schedule, within time, within budget, reliable, quality, all those things, and the way we managed. So they spent all day with us and picked up those kind of tips. And then they went back and started building the university. I got a call and I got permission from Dr. Milligan to share this with you. About 3 weeks later, he called me and said, Ed, I was quite impressed with what we heard at Martin, and we're already incorporating some of those techniques. He said, but could you and I have breakfast some Saturday? I said, yes. So we had breakfast. He said, well, come out here. They only had 2 buildings on the campus then, the administration building, I think it was a student building. And I went out at 9 o'clock, and we talked how they learned so much and things and techniques, and the personnel seemed to be all esprit de corps and so forth. And he said, Ed, I'm going to ask you something to consider. Yeah, what's that? He said, well, I'd like to have you come work for me as Vice President of Development and Long-Range Planning for the university. I was emotional, you know, and here I am, my PhD from Balmer, and he wants me to be Vice President of the university. You know, and I said, Doc, I said, you know, Charlie, I've never made it a habit of making a snap decision. I always want to pray on it, think about it, and decide what's best. I said, but I think I can probably give you my answer. I said, since I was a teenager, I've been praying for the full-time ministry. And my full-time ministry means people. And although I'm honored by what you're offering me, I want to get into that field. He got up and he hugged me. He said, now, let me tell you something. He said, I don't know who knows about this except my wife. He said, but 1936 to 1957, I was a Baptist minister, a very active Baptist minister. At one time, he had about 800 Baptist churches between Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, those areas. And that was his life. And he said, Ed, you know, I come a point where there was some politics and bickering in the church, which I couldn't take. That's not why I went into ministry. So I started education. And that's how I got here. He authorized me to share those 2 stories with you and has become a dear friend of mine. And he'll get a private viewing of this talk and pictures and everything else someday. The last story I want to share is called The Mouse Comes to Town. And people don't realize this or know that. Remember, I'm a pack rat. And I remember, I was here. We came down to 56 and bought 6,400 acres for $1.3 million. Well, in 1965, it was announced finally that Disney bought 36,000 acres. Now, maybe you don't know how this happened. It was one of the best plans ever, and Walt Disney was a visionary dreamer. But here's what they did. Roy and Walt Disney visit the governor and a lieutenant governor in Tallahassee and explained that they were going to have a Disney theme park, etc., east of the Mississippi River. And they were saying it was going to be big. Now, this is in maybe 61 or 2 or 3. But they made it clear to the governor that those 4 people were the only ones to know that, because they also thought of Tennessee or Georgia. So they made it clear if it leaks out, the deal probably closed, because they knew they weren't going to buy 36,000 acres from one person. What they were going to do was not buy anything. I was here, that's why I know, and some of my men made millions getting involved. What he did, he'd go in that area, which you now know as Disney, and he'd go to this citrus owner or whoever it was and say, look, I'm interested in your property, and, well, 150,000. Well, he didn't buy it. He took option to buy it at that price. Then he went over here and got 1,000 acres. He went over here and got 500 acres. He was doing that very quietly. But at Martin, I was getting phone calls because I was on a dog and pony show going to different companies for a Pentagon, and I could start getting phone calls from somebody at McDonnell Douglas. Hey, Ed, we just heard somebody from St. Louis bought property in Orlando. Somebody up in Boston, somebody in California, somebody in Texas. We couldn't trace it because what happened, the person that made this option deal was from Texas. And when you check, all I did was did it for some guy in Boston. And you check it, I only did it for some guy over here. They had that kind of a network that no one could trace who was buying all this property. And then on October 1965, the Sentinel said the new buyer is Walt Disney, 36,000. That's the rest of the story. So the mouse came to town, really, in property, in 65, 9 years after Martin. By that time, Martin had changed this town economically and every other way, and that's why I believe we don't get our due credit to being the big changer. Disney come in and really mopped up from what we had. They became bigger and everything, but they learned from us. So they quickly found what they had done for us in 1956. So they demanded all kind of things, as you well know now. They got their own city out there, their own fire department, their own electric, they got everything. Because the county and the state gave them everything. Because if they didn't, Walt Disney said, I'll buy the whole county. And if he did, the county commissioners would be dwarfs with Snow White. Now don't you tell any of them. It looks like my time's running out. Now look, if somebody says amen, I'll stop. God bless you. Thank you very much.